Welcome to Class C of the American Road Race Proxy at South Manchester Slot Racing Club. This is the classic Trans Am and NASCAR class, otherwise known as the Blue Camaro class. I'm very grateful that Graham put the numbered stickers on the bottom, so I know which is which. I think this is going to be a very close class because there's a lot of similar cars, at least body-wise. There's a bit of variety in chassis configuration, etc. So we will run through these, make sure everything's running. This isn't the timed laps, this is the shakedown. Make sure everything goes around the track okay, but I will obviously give some feedback on the good and the bad. First up, we have Mountain Views Blue Chevy Camaro. I don't know if it's a Pioneer or a Scale Electric body, but it's a nice finish. I like the nice matte roof. That's a nice finish to it. It's a 3D chassis, inline, punchy scale auto motor. A little bit of float in the body and the pod. They're pretty decently wide tyres. Maybe could have got a little bit wider. Possibly could have gone a little bit wider on the track, but I'm sure it's been tested, and that's what the builder settled on. The guide nicely centers returns. Front axle's moving quite well. So yeah, it looks like it's got all the bits required to run quite well. Let's see how it goes. So it goes very well is the answer. Very smooth. It's quite a punchy motor, so it had a decent amount of top speed down the straight. It had good grip in the corners. Maybe could have done with a little bit more body float here and there. It hit a couple of bumps and was looked a little bit like it might jump out. But it didn't. It ran very, very nicely. I think overall that's a really nice car. Obviously the first one I've run, so I don't know how competitive it will be just yet, but certainly no complaints, it runs very smoothly. Next up we have Team Cube's Pontiac GTO. Obviously a very different body shape, much longer body, heavier. 3D chassis though, a pod, lots of float, lots of movement, nice free running wheels. They're decently wide rear wheels as well, although the track looks a little bit narrower. It could go well. It's got all of the things it needs to go well, but obviously it might be at a bit of a disadvantage against some of the Camaros, for example, just with the body shell. But we'll see how it runs. It looks nice. So it does run really nicely, not quite as much punch as the last car, obviously only a S-can motor, not the long can, but it handles very nicely, even with the body. It did get a little bit tail happy in a couple of places, so when we get onto the timed laps, it might be that it's more difficult to get a quick lap out of it. Good balance of where you're putting the power on to make sure it doesn't slide too much or kick out too much. But it's a really nicely put together car and ran really, really smoothly. Next up we have ALS Racing's Chevy Camaro. I think this is the same body shell maybe as the previous one. A 3D chassis again, but this chassis seems to be more in keeping with the original. It's got quite a big step in it, it's not flat like some of the previous chassis. A sidewinder as well. There's no movement in the pod, a tiny bit in the body float, but I don't think that will be noticeable on the track. The tyres look like they will be grippy. The fronts are not spinning particularly. Again, for the timed, I'll see if that's just something in the way. I think they're independent as well. They're independent, but unfortunately not spinning too well. But that's a decent looking guide on there. So we'll see how he runs. Yeah, so I'm not sure if it came across on the video, but I think definitely the front wheel's not running too smoothly. It was holding that back down the straights. It sounded like it was pushing its front wheels down the straights rather than turning them. It had nice gearing and motor. That was a good combination. I think the additional sort of body height over the previous Corvette made it a bit more tippy, and with the drag down the straight as well, it wasn't going into the corners very quickly, and then it was a little bit tippy in the corners. So it's a nice looking car. It's nearly there. I think just a couple of little tweaks and that could be really good. I will try and see if it's just something in the way of the front wheels, because we've had a few of those now, so I don't know if it's something to do with the way they're transported maybe, or if that's just the life of a proxy car. But I will see if I can get any of these sorted out. Next we have Harrison's Racing's blue Chevy Camaro. Now this one is a scale extric, or a Hornby at least, as it says on the bottom, so that's helpful. This one, the braid is a little bit twisted and turned. I've tried to sort it out as quickly as as well as I can very quickly before racing. I'll try and do a bit of a better job of that. But it's got nice wide rear tyres. It's got the tiniest bit of body float, probably not enough to be noticeable. But we know the Camaros run well, and this is a sidewinder, so hopefully we'll handle well. Let's see how it goes. So there we go. I don't know if the sound came across at all, but the sweet sound of Scalextric gearings there, quite noisy, which I don't know. I haven't got any facts to prove it, but I always think it must be losing some efficiency in putting the power down. So it wasn't the quickest, but it did handle quite well. Actually, it had a nice balance between the power that was available and the grip that was available. So it's not too bad at all for the standard chassis, standard Scalextric. It seemed to run okay. And next up we have Loose Salute. Hopefully I'm saying that right. It's a Ford Falcon, so something a bit different in this class. Resin body, I guess, resin chassis. There's not much, let's say no body rock in the chassis, or I don't think those tyres are glued, no. So I haven't been checking whether all the tyres are glued, but these ones are noticeably not glued, as in they also seem a little bit loose. If you're going around the quicker corners on this track and the track is rubbered in, you will get a lot of hopping from that, because there's so much grip that it will peel the tyre off. Not all the way off, but it will move it across the edge, and you will get a bit of hopping. It's got the front axle's got quite a lot of side to side play, so it will spin freely in the middle. Going around the corners, have to see how that plays out, whether it goes to the wrong side and get jammed. It's a great looking car. I like the stance and the wheels inset. Looks really good. Let's see how it runs. So that runs quite nicely. It's nice and smooth down the straight. I don't know if you could see at the top bend, it definitely had that hopping that I was talking about, where the tyre starts to peel off the wheel a little bit. These aren't the time lapse either, so when the tyres get a bit more heat in them and we're running a bit faster, you might find that becomes more and more of a problem. So that might hinder the overall lap time, because you find you can't push around the faster corners. But it's a lovely looking car, and it does run fairly smoothly. If those tyres were glued on, I think that would have been a big help. I couldn't really see, because of the design of the hubcaps, I couldn't really see whether the front wheels were turning or not around the corners. I might have a little look closer to the track with somebody else running it, but I think that could be an issue. But overall, really nice looking car, and goes pretty nicely. Next up, this is my car, so I won't be running this heat in the race, but I thought I will just give it a quick couple of shakedown laps, really just to see if it runs, and it is running as I remember it. I did put a bit of tuning into this. The Class A car, I didn't do too much to, but this one, I did put a lot of effort into this one. What I want to check really is it still running now as I remember it? I'm not timing the laps, because I don't think that would be fair. I haven't timed anyone else's, but you know, you can kind of remember, you have that muscle memory of what it was like. In terms of setup, it still feels basically as it left. Lots of pod float, a fair amount of body float. I went with a Revo guide because it works well here. Obviously that hasn't worked out for me at other tracks, but it works well here. The front wheels, they don't feel as smooth as I remember. So maybe that is something, because I've said a lot of the front wheels aren't turning. They're turning, but they're not super free. So maybe that's something to think about for myself and for other people, I guess, when they're sending a car off to a proxy, is maybe something that can maintain that performance all the way through, because that's definitely not as smooth as I remember. But overall, I mean, I think it basically looks as I remember it and feels as I remember it. So hopefully that is the same for everyone else's car as well. Puts your mind at rest a bit that they are basically as they left the factory. Let's see how it goes anyway. Yeah, that does feel very similar to how I remember, which is really, really good to see. And hopefully, you know, you don't really care about my car, but hopefully it puts your mind at rest that your car is also similar to as it left you. You can probably see what I'm talking about with the difference between the glued tyres that are completely glued to the rim. There's no hopping, even though I was taking it quite quickly around the top corner. The front wheels are definitely causing a little bit of drag, but they're very, very slippy in any case, so not too much. And yeah, it was pretty quick, pretty much as I remember it. Next up, we have Brumos RSR blue Chevy Camaro. Now I don't know what the body is on this. Again, I'm not really up on them, whether it's a Pioneer or a Scale Electric, but it does look different. The front lights and everything look different to the previous ones. This looks like it's going to run absolutely fantastic. Brass chassis. Oh, let's try and show you. Brass chassis, sidewinder, lots of nice float between the body and the centerpiece of the chassis. Not sure there's any pod float, no, I don't think so. But a nice long guide, again similar to the way I had my guide set up right up to the front. The front wheels, again, not really turning that much. I think they're independent, or hopefully they are, because they are now. But they're not turning. I will, again, obviously I will try and see if there's just anything obvious that I'm missing here. But I think just touching the body is the answer with that one. Just touching the body. But it feels good. It feels like it's got a nice low center of gravity. I don't know if you can actually feel that, but I am perceiving it to have a very low center of gravity, and it looks fantastic. Let's see how it runs. Well, it runs beautifully, basically. I honestly could have just kept going with that all day, I think. It was very consistent, very flat. Didn't quite have the top speed. I don't know what that gearing is, but could have handled a bit more top speed. But it was able to carry most of it through the faster corners. I've just noticed that the tyre / gear clearance is getting a little bit thin. This isn't going to be a very high wear track, I don't think, but that might become a little bit of an issue later on if there's some rougher surfaces that might doesn't need to take much, half a mil or something off it. But at the moment, it's running really, really nicely. Definitely the front wheels could be a cause for a lack of top speed, to be fair. but overall really, really nice. Last in this class we have a Chevy Camaro, but it's not blue, a grey one. I'm pretty confident that this is a Pioneer one because it says on the bottom of the chassis. And it looks very standard. It looks standard guide setup. They're plastic wheels as far as I can tell, so I assume they are standard. Again, the guide / gear clearance is getting pretty close on there. Being the standard chassis, it looks taller. I mean, it feels and looks just noticeably taller than some of the previous runners, so high center of gravity. But the tires look very nice, wide. They look plenty of grip in them, and the front wheels actually running perfectly fine on this one. So maybe that's the answer. Don't mess about too much with them. Just leave them standard. They'll be fine. But let's see how it goes. I think I might have forgot to mention earlier, that's Rosillo Racing's Chevy Camaro. It's the only grey one, so I'm sure you picked out your car in the lineup, but I don't think I mentioned it. And it runs lovely for a standard car. Maybe it's not a standard motor actually, that looks like a slightly hopped up motor, but standard chassis, it handled the power really well. It was pretty quick. You know, it's an S-Can, so it wasn't the fastest, but it was pretty decent. Handled that power really well. I thought the guide might be an issue because they are standard Pioneer guides, like standard scale electric. They're not always, you know, seated that well or that secure. But it ran really nice, really well. I think, you know, it might not quite have the lap time of some of the more hopped up cars, but for a standard car, that runs really nicely. So that's it for Class C, the Trans Am class. I think it's going to be really close. There are a lot of cars that run really well there, really smooth, obviously similar body styles. There's a nice variety in the type, layout, etc. of the chassis. So I think that's going to be a really good class. I won't be driving it because my car's in it. So John will be driving it. I'm a little bit jealous of him because that's a really nice class.